Stress and anxiety have an interesting relationship with one another because although they're ultimately two very different things, they can feel almost identical. The biggest difference between stress and anxiety is what causes it. Anxiety is considered to be a pathological response, meaning that to some degree, and this can sound a little judgmental, but I don't really know a better way to say it, with anxiety, to some degree, your body and your brain are overreacting to certain things. The way that you think or feel, or the way that you're appraising a situation, causes you to perceive it as scarier, harder, more dangerous, or just more unpleasant than it actually ends up being. Stress feels almost exactly the same, but stress comes from a pretty realistic and accurate appraisal of our life. What I often see happen to people is as they make really good progress and headway on their anxiety, they get more involved with certain things in life. They take on more responsibilities, they take on more challenges. And so as their anxiety is going down, their stress level often starts to go up because they're busier and they have more going on. And the net result of one of these going down while the other goes up is that life ends up not necessarily feeling that different. Now, to some degree, being able to take on more challenges and responsibilities in life as you work on reducing symptoms of anxiety is a good thing and is the goal. But something I see happen to people sometimes is they end up taking on kind of a pathological amount of stress. I think often because they feel like their anxiety has held them back from life for so long that they feel behind. They feel like they have ground to cover and like everyone else is ahead of them. And so now I have to work twice as hard as everybody else to try to just kind of get back to like a quote normal place for my age or just for whatever benchmark that you're using. And something that happened to me is that as my anxiety got much better controlled, I realized that I had some really maladaptive habits that were massively increasing my stress level and ultimately causing me to not feel a whole lot better than before I started working on my anxiety at all. And so today I want to review with you guys 6 techniques that I have learned and that I practice every single day to try to keep my stress level manageable as someone who, at least on a basic level, is still very prone to pathological anxiety. So I have to be really careful about how these two things interact because if I end up living an overly stressful lifestyle, it can trigger latent anxiety for me that hasn't really been an issue for that long, and it can bring everything right back up to the forefront. Before I get to my 6 specific strategies, I want to talk about one sort of macro strategy that I have for life in general. And I really view not just my life, but everybody's life as essentially like a budget, as a system of inputs and outputs. Because I think so often in life, what gets us to this stretched way too thin, on the verge of panic, everyday kind of lifestyle is that we have a mismatch of inputs and outputs. We have some certain amount of like energy or relaxation or recovery built into our lives. And then every day takes some certain amount of like peace or energy away from us. I know it sounds very new agey, but whatever, just bear with me. And it's so easy to get in a state of imbalance where every day takes a little bit more from you than what you can essentially restore or pay back. And the net result of this is that life just gets harder and harder and harder and feels worse and worse and worse. So all of these techniques I'm going to review with you today are different strategies that I have used to essentially balance my emotional budget and live what I would consider to be a sustainable life from a stress perspective. It doesn't mean I don't do hard things. I do think that I have a pretty busy and pretty challenging life. But in order to offset that, because my work, for example, is very demanding. I'm an entrepreneur, business owner, content creator, and I try to balance that with family, and I try to balance that with actually practicing everything I preach and trying to stay physically and mentally healthy. It's a lot. And so these are the changes I've made in my life to kind of keep that emotional budget balanced and keep myself from spiraling out of control, which I know that I am very capable of doing from experience. So the first thing that I stopped doing to better manage my stress level, and right away, this is gonna be a contentious one. I'm gonna start with the most controversial one because I have a feeling you guys will have some feelings on this. I stopped watching the news, and really, I stopped watching the news right around the time I became a trauma therapist, because this goes right back to the budget idea. There is a finite amount of horribleness that I can be aware of before it's simply too much, and I get really cynical and like pessimistic and nihilistic, and my brain is very predisposed towards like, what is the point of all this? The world is a horrible place. People suck. Why bother? And it doesn't take a lot for things to kind of activate that network in my brain. And trauma therapy fills that cup for me. And even that like puts me over the edge sometimes, to be honest with you guys. So the news is not really the news. And you guys probably know this already, but at least when we're talking about like the major news agencies, they have a bias. And I don't actually mean the political bias. They do absolutely have a political bias. But there's actually one bias that they all have in common, and that is that they all have a negativity bias. And the reason is every major news agency is just a business. They're literally for-profit corporations. And they are very aware that appealing to your fear is what gets you to either watch the longest or click on the most links that they have or whatever, however they're trying to get money from your eyeballs and your attention. And they know that if they summarize the scariest possible stuff, that's going to get you to keep watching, because that's what's going to get you to say, oh, I need to keep watching this. I need to know what's going on, because like everyone I love might die and the world might blow up tomorrow. So I need to be informed about those things. And where this gets contentious is I'm not suggesting that you should be completely ignorant about what's going on in the world, because that's not necessarily a good thing either. But you have to know where your limit is. If I wasn't a trauma therapist, I probably would still watch the news to some degree. But you need to have a limit. And when I say watch the news, I mean this very broadly too, because I know many of us get news without like sitting down and watching Fox or CNN or whoever. There's news on our phones all the time. There's news on Reddit. There's news on TikTok. There's news on YouTube. There's news on your homepage when you log into a browser. Like, it's all over the place. So just take a really honest inventory with yourself and try to figure out, where is my line? Like what's the maximum amount of really awful stuff that I can absorb before it starts to really get to me and really cause some problems for me. And set some limits for yourself that keep you below that line. Only you can determine where that line is, but I think that you should determine where that line is, because it's so easy for us to get completely overwhelmed by the often awful state of the world. And for the most part, it's things we don't have agency over. And putting a lot of time and energy and caring a lot about things you have no agency in is essentially the recipe for burnout. And I don't want you guys burning out. So just be really mindful of your relationship with the news in its various forms and consider having some limits. The second thing that I stopped doing to better manage my stress level, this one also might be controversial, is I stopped watching sports. And it's kind of, this one might sound silly, but it's kind of for a similar reason as the news, which is that ultimately I am the kind of guy or person, this is not a gender specific idea, I'm the kind of person who, for whatever reason, gets really wrapped up in sports. Like, I really want a specific team or athlete or fighter or whoever to win. I get attached. Like, I get into storylines. I like to kind of get to know like the personalities and, you know, the people kind of behind the scenes. And I become really invested in wanting certain outcomes to happen. And when those outcomes don't happen, it could spoil my day, or sometimes even more. I mean, I've talked about this before in other content on here. And it just, the amount of time that my heart rate would spike more from like watching a Vikings game or watching a UFC event than from anything I was doing in my actual life was not a small amount. And I don't think that's the way that things should be. And I know people who are way more extreme about it than me too. It really just goes back to this idea of being overly emotionally invested in something that you have no agency in. And if watching sporting events or any kind of, I'm saying sports because that's what I watched, but this could be any competition. Maybe you're really into like the dog competitions. I know that's not what they're called, but I don't know that world. I'm sorry. Or maybe you're really into dance competitions or kids' beauty pageants or whatever. But if you get so into it that it becomes a stressor for you, then it's on your budget sheet, it has now become an expense. This thing is supposed to be a hobby. It's supposed to be a relief from stress. And I know people who are more stressed out about their hobbies than their job or their home or their health. it's no longer serving its intended purpose if that happens. And it's grown into something it was not supposed to be in your life. It's not doing its job anymore. There's this acronym, and you're gonna think you know what this acronym is, but I'm using it differently. The acronym is WTF. It doesn't mean what you think. It's a therapy acronym, and it stands for what's the function? Like, in other words, why do I do this? What is the point of this thing being in my life? And what you often find when you assess things in your life through this WTF lens is that there's many things that aren't doing the things that you want or need them to do, or that they're supposed to be doing. And when you identify this thing in my life is no longer serving its function, you need to either modify it or get rid of it. Sports were supposed to be a relaxing stress reliever for me, and they weren't. They did not serve their function, and so I chose to pretty much remove them from my life, and I am now less stressed with one fewer leisure activity. It also, this one might be more sports specific, but it's so much to keep up with. Got to keep up with the stats and the standings and the storylines and the injuries, and like it was just too much of a commitment for me. It became a stressor, and the inherent stress that is built into my life from just doing the basics is enough. I don't need extra stress. I have no interest in having extra stress. So anything that causes me extra stress, at this point, I'm ruthless about it. Just boom, cut it off, done. The third thing that I stopped doing in my life to better manage my stress was I stopped letting myself get horribly disorganized. Now, like, I know that's not one people do on purpose. So this one might feel a little like disingenuous at first, because that's not like watching sports or watching the news where you can just be like, oh, I'll stop being disorganized today. I know. But at least for me, there was a certain level of permissiveness that I was giving myself to be disorganized. I was like, oh, well, I'm in grad school, I'm busy with this and that. I don't have time to like know where stuff is or label stuff. But I eventually started to realize that disorganization was costing me more time than being organized would. And it made me so stressed. Like every time I'd have yard work to do or something would break in our townhouse or my car, a car that was very prone to breaking for a while, like before I could even get to the stress of trying to fix the problem, I first had to deal with the stress of like finding my tools or figuring out where, I know I own this somewhere, but where is it? Can I find it, or am I gonna have to rebuy it even though I already have it and I don't have money to rebuy things I already have, but it's gonna take me hours to find it because it's in a pile of other similar things. And it just, disorganization, I think is, at least for me, is like one of the most stressful things there is. And just knowing that I have stuff, but I don't know where it is and can't find it and can't get to it when I need it, it drives me nuts. It makes me feel almost claustrophobic. And so I had, this was like a 2 a.m. thing, okay? It was shortly after we'd moved to a new house and we hadn't really finished unpacking or anything. And I had horrible insomnia one night for whatever reason. And I looked in our like utility room, which was also kind of a storage room. And there was just this pile of stuff that we couldn't figure out where to put. And we just dumped it. And I just kind of went nuts and organized it. I don't think I slept that night. It wasn't a manic episode. I was just really stressed and had insomnia. But I just went on this organizing bender, basically. And I'm not going to say I felt better right away. I felt terrible the next day because I didn't sleep. But once I caught up on the sleep I lost from going on my organizing bender, I felt so much better. I was like, oh my gosh, I actually know where things are. Like, if I need my drill today, I could get it in like 10 seconds. It was so exciting and so liberating. And that's a general principle and an energy I've really been mindful of keeping, because I think it's so important. It is so easy to get overwhelmed with our stuff, with our possessions. And that, again, it goes back to WTF. If the things you own are causing you stress, they are not serving their intended purpose in your life. You should own things to either save you time, make your life more fun, make your life easier. If I know this is like a quote from Fight Club, and I'm not trying to be an edgy 17-year-old, even though on the inside I still kind of am a little bit. But if the things you own end up being a problem for you or being a stressor in your life, they are doing the exact opposite of what they're supposed to do. Some of it you may just need to organize. Some of it you may need to get rid of. You guys might know I'm kind of like a wannabe pseudo minimalist, and I really think there are significant mental health implications to this, especially for those of us that live in the US, where it's like culturally normal to be a mild hoarder. I just don't think it's good for us. And I am so much less stressed with less things and with knowing where they are. It makes a night and day difference, and I would strongly encourage you to consider it if it's not already a big part of your life. On a very related note, the fourth thing that I mostly stopped doing to better manage my stress is I stopped buying so much crap. You guys, we buy so much crap, and so much of it adds nothing of value to your life beyond the dopamine rush you get from engaging your impulse for 10 seconds when you first buy the thing. It almost immediately becomes a stressor. It almost immediately becomes an obligation. Again, you have to know where it is. Some things you have to like charge or keep in, perfect working condition. A lot of possessions require maintenance. It's so easy for this to spiral out of control. And not only does that feed into the disorganization that we just talked about, it also tends to feed into financial issues. Most of us don't love our jobs. I know that I'm very fortunate to get to do a job that I legitimately enjoy. I get that a lot of you guys don't have that. It's even important for me. It's twice as important if you don't like your work, because everything you buy makes you have to work more. And so I know that it's a coping mechanism. I get it. I know that sometimes after a long, hard day of work, you just want to impulse buy something on Amazon or Nordstrom or whatever. And I am not going to tell you that I've never done it. I'm even not going to tell you that I haven't done it this month, but I try not to do it, and I'm getting better at it. And it keeps you stuck in this corporate mindset of I have to work more to get more of the stuff, but I don't really want the stuff, and I don't really feel any better when I get the stuff, so I have to work more. It never ends, and you get stuck in this dysfunctional cycle of pointless acquisition. And if you really get your spending under control, you might find that correspondingly, maybe you don't have to work as much. Maybe you can take more time off or chill out on the side hustle or whatever it is you have to do to make ends meet. Finances are the biggest stressor for most people. There's been so many surveys, polls, studies on this. Money is such a stressor. And that was even true 10, 15 years ago. I think it's probably twice as true now after COVID and massive inflation. Life is so freaking expensive. And anything you can do to decrease your financial burden is going to have a hugely beneficial impact on your net stress level. So you need to be really honest with yourself about what you actually need and what's going to actually long-term increase the quality of your life. There are some purchases that are absolutely worth it. I'm not saying become a monk and own nothing, unless that's what you want to do. I don't think most people would be happy with that life. But most of us have gotten so sucked up into this consumerist mindset that keeps us in this endless vicious cycle of overemployment and long hours and overtime and side hustles because we need it to pay for the crap that we don't really need. And that's the way you can pull the rug out from under this whole thing. So just be so mindful about the things you choose to purchase. There is an app, I don't remember the name of it, it's not a sponsored video, but I think it's not even an app, I think it's a browser extension that you put in your salary or your hourly rate into this browser extension, and it converts prices on websites to time. Let me tell you, if you install that browser extension, your shopping habits will change. Because when you realize that you're buying a 3-hour coffee cup, it is a lot harder to justify the purchase. I can't remember the name of it. I bet one of you guys know. I'm sure it's not hard to find. But if you have really struggle with not engaging in impulse buying, either just mentally calculate that in your head or download the browser extension. Because when you go to buy something and you realize this is 3 days worth of work for me, it tends to put it in a whole different context because you trade your time for money and then you trade your money for stuff. So money's just the middleman here. What you're actually doing is you're trading your time with your family or to do your hobbies or to work on your health. You're trading that time for stuff. That stuff better be good or this budget is imbalanced. Your emotional budget, this input and output system, it's not working out real well. It's really not. The fifth thing I stopped doing to better manage my stress level, and this one's so obvious, but it definitely needs to be said, is that I stopped saying yes to everything all the time. Now, in my personal life, I'm usually pretty good about saying no. I'm pretty protective of my time, and I generally have good boundaries around that. I have not historically been so good at that professionally. And some of this, I'm not trying to play the blame game, but some of this I'm going to blame on my industry a little bit because I work in a field where we spend years doing either unpaid or poorly paid internships. And kind of the message that gets drilled into our heads early on, I'd love to know if this is also your guys' experience, those of you who work in different industries or fields than me. Like being in college, I feel like I was made to believe that if someone wants to allow you to work for them for free, that you've gotten like a sick deal from that. And you should just be happy to have any opportunity whatsoever. So I really early on got into this mindset of like, just anytime someone wants you to do work, say yes, because you shouldn't turn down any of those opportunities. I ended up so massively overbooked, like to the point where I literally would have had to teleport from one job to the next. I had 2 jobs, and then one of the jobs had 2 locations. So I worked in 3 different places doing all these groups, and because I didn't know how to say no. Anytime someone said, "Hey Scott, do you want a new therapy client? Do you want a new group? Do you want to do some program development?" It was yes, 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 of course. I want all the experience, I want all the training. And I got so stuck. I got so completely stuck that I did not know how to get out of it. And I had to learn how to say no to things. I had to learn how to be protective of my work time as well. There is a limit. That's so many of these things are going to come back to this, but you have limits. You're not Superman or Superwoman. You are a mortal being, and there's only so much that you should commit yourself to. It is not bad to say no. There are times you're going to have to do it. Personally, professionally, not every opportunity is worth your time. You really need to be selective about it, or you're going to end up like me and have to constantly be rearranging your schedule. Me like 10 years ago. This isn't me now. Well, I've gotten a lot better at it. I have growth to do on this one too. This video is as much for me as it is for you guys. I'm reminding myself of the things I need to work on. I am getting better at it though. Do not say yes to every opportunity that comes your way. And if you have an automatic yes, like I do, like if I don't think, I'll say yes. So I basically have to buy myself time. So I have to say, give me 24 hours. I gotta check my schedule. I gotta check my other commitments. I will get back to you. And I do always get back to people. But if I get put on the spot and I feel like I have to give an answer right then and there, and it's like work related or career related, I will almost always say yes. So I have to buy myself some time to get out of that reflexive yes that I have. If you have a reflexive yes like me, try not to answer right away and try to practice and almost have a script in your head and get used to saying, give me 24 hours or give me whatever. The 6th thing that I stopped doing to better manage my stress level, and this is one of those kind of inverted ones, I stopped skipping the gym. When I feel like I don't have enough time to do everything in a day, the gym is usually the first thing, or at least historically has been the first thing that I put on the chopping block because it's optional, right? Like I have to go to work, most of these things are like, I have to do them, I can't not do them. I don't have to work out. It is technically an optional thing, but it is my most important input. I mean, right along there with sleep and nutrition, which I'm not going to skip. The gym is my most important input in my emotional budget that I am somewhat prone to skipping. We know that being physically active literally changes how your brain appraises stressors. Your brain feels like things are less stressful when you have been physically active. The part of your brain that is responsible for emotion regulation, for having these big feelings come up inside of you and saying, okay, we're feeling this, let's figure out what to do about it, instead of letting it spiral out of control and take over our entire lives, is your frontal lobes. Your frontal lobes are the part of your brain that are most negatively impacted by lack of blood flow or oxygen. And do you know what helps maximize blood flow and oxygen to the brain? Being physically fit and being physically active in whatever format you want. The great thing about the research around this is over and over and over again, we've seen the format doesn't really matter. So if you're somebody, if your job is physically active, you probably don't even need to worry about this that much because you're probably getting enough of it in if you're on your feet most of the day, walking, lifting, moving things around, childcare, then you got it. If you're like me and you sit all day long, you really should try to have something to offset that. It is not good for your brain to not be physically active. Life gets so much harder and so much more stressful. And I guarantee that whatever the amount of time you invest in your daily physical activity is, whether it's 30 minutes, it will more than pay you back. Because how much time do you spend in a day just dealing with your stress? Like just sitting there trying to figure out how to cope. It's probably more than 30 minutes a day, right? Where you just sit there and you're like, how in the heck am I gonna deal with today? I know people who spend an hour doing that before they even get out of bed. And so the net cost in terms of time and in terms of energy is greater, from a stress perspective at least, to not be physically active than to be physically active. It's also a great way to burn off energy. Another one of the problems we have with the stress of our modern lives is stress is a physical thing as much as it is emotional. We get stressed out, it builds up all this energy, excuse me, all this energy in our bodies because our bodies think something's about to go down, like physically something's about to happen. Most of the stress that we experience is social, financial, emotional. It's not like we're in mortal danger and we have to run away or defend ourselves. Sometimes it is, not to be insensitive, but the majority of us don't experience that type of stress regularly. Our limbic systems and our nervous systems don't really know the difference. So they build up all this physical energy, getting ready for us to have to deal with this physical stressor that never manifests. And this energy just stays stuck, and our muscles are tense, and we get achy and sore and tired because we don't get to do the thing that our bodies are preparing for us to do. Being physically active is such a good way for you to discharge some of that energy. And it's one of the few, very, very few, quick wins in mental health. There are not a lot of things that a mental health provider can teach you that will make you feel better quickly. Most of them are long games. Physical activity works quickly, like weeks quickly. 2 to 4 weeks, you will probably start to feel a difference in your stress level. It is the most important thing for my mental health. I've said that over and over and over again. I will never stop saying it. I think the gym saved my life. And the gym can be anything. Again, the gym doesn't have to mean you go to a gym. The gym can be your yard. The gym can be your basement. The gym can be a walking trail. The gym can be a mountain. The gym can be a lake. It's like anything, whatever you need it to be. But don't let your brain stagnate. It's not good for it. We need to be physically active for our stress level and for our mental health. Those are the 6 most important life changes I've made once I kind of got out of the pit of like chronic anxiety, but still dealt with a lot of high stress. So I hope that this content was valuable to you. I hope it helps, and I hope you can implement some of these things, and I will see you next time. Take care.